I'd been looking forward to that trip for weeks. A quiet weekend by the water. No city noise, no work emails, no distractions. Just me, my best friends Mason, Tyler, and Nate at a rented lake house somewhere near Alpena, Michigan. The drive took nearly 6 hours from Grand Rapids. By the time we left the main highway, the sun had melted into a gray haze. The road turned from asphalt to gravel, and every mile deeper into those woods made our cell service drop another bar. The GPS lost signal around the same time the trees swallowed the last hint of light. Mason cracked a joke about us starring in some backwoods horror movie. We all laughed, but it didn't feel that funny when we finally saw the cabin. It was older than the photos. Rust-red siding peeling off in sheets. Tin roof rusted brown, the kind of porch swing that creaked just from the wind. The lake behind it looked like black glass, completely still. No ripples, no sound, but the occasional croak of a frog somewhere in the distance. When I stepped out of the car, the air hit me, thick with pine, cold and damp. You could smell the lake in it. Tyler found the lockbox and we shuffled inside, carrying our bags. The place smelled like cedar and dust. A single oil lamp on the counter flickered when we turned on the light switch, which barely worked. No service, no Wi-Fi. Just us and the sound of that creaking dock out back. That first night was quiet. We unpacked, lit a fire, cracked open some beers, and played a few hands of poker. The crackling wood and lake breeze through the open window almost made it peaceful. Around midnight, Mason stepped outside to smoke. The rest of us were mid-conversation when his voice came through the doorway, low, confused. "Hey, you guys seeing this?" We walked out to the porch. Down near the dock, maybe 50 feet away, a man was standing. At first, I thought he was fishing, but his hands were in his pockets. He wasn't moving, not even when the wind picked up. He faced the water, completely still. "Probably some local," Nate whispered, but there weren't any other houses around, at least not that we'd seen. We called out to him. No answer. Mason raised his flashlight and pointed it at the figure. The beam hit the side of his face. Pale skin, dark hair plastered to his forehead, eyes that didn't blink. He was barefoot, and before any of us could say another word, he stepped off the dock. There was a heavy splash. We sprinted down there, but when the flashlight beam hit the surface, all we saw were widening ripples. The water swallowed them in seconds. No bubbles, no noise, just fog, closing in again.
We barely slept after that. Every creak of the wood made me sit up. Around 2 a.m., the wind shifted. The kind of wind that feels heavy, like it's carrying something with it. Then came the first sound. 3 dull knocks against the wall by the kitchen. Slow, spaced out, deliberate. We froze. Nate mouthed, "Raccoon." But we both knew a raccoon doesn't knock. I grabbed the flashlight again and crept toward the sound. When I flicked the beam toward the window, I caught a smear. Wet streaks dragging down the glass, like fingertips sliding across. The knocks came again, this time from the opposite wall. Mason whispered, "He's circling the cabin." We killed the lantern and stood in total darkness. Outside, something scraped across the porch, soft, dragging footsteps on wood. It moved slowly, all the way around the cabin. Then silence. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, I worked up the nerve to peek through the blinds. Nothing, just fog and the faint reflection of my own terrified face. We didn't sleep a minute. By dawn, the fire was out and our nerves were gone. The fog outside looked thicker than the night before. Mason went out first. His boots sunk into the mud and he called us over. There were footprints, bare, deep, pressed into the earth leading from the dock to the porch, then back to the water. Each step filled with rainwater and reflected the gray sky like tiny mirrors. We followed the trail to the end of the dock. The last footprint disappeared beneath the lake's surface. No drag marks, no sign of anyone crawling out. Just still, black water. We packed everything in under 15 minutes. By the time the car hit the gravel road, none of us had spoken a word. As we reached the bend that overlooked the lake, Mason turned in his seat. He froze. "He's on the dock," he whispered. I looked too. A figure stood there, again. Same height, same dark outline, same stillness, facing the water. We didn't stop, didn't even slow down. Half an hour later, when my phone finally caught a signal, I pulled up the rental app to cancel the booking. The host messaged me back almost immediately. "You must be mistaken. That property's been locked up since 2021. Nobody's rented it since before the pandemic." I showed the message to the others. Nobody said a word. Mason just stared out the window as the trees blurred by, whispering, "He wasn't facing us. He was waiting for something in the water."
I used to drive nights for a rideshare company in Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid my rent, and most nights it was quiet. Bar drop-offs, airport runs, the usual. That Friday in October started like any other. Drizzle on the windshield, country music low in the background, and the faint smell of black coffee in the cup holder. Around 1 a.m., I got a ping from a neighborhood on the far west side, almost rural, where city lights fade into two-lane darkness. Pickup name, Emma K. Rating, 4.9. Destination, downtown Columbus. About a 25-minute ride. When I pulled onto the narrow road, most houses were dark. One porch light burned weakly at the end of a gravel drive. A figure stood there, under the light. Small frame, hood up, one hand clutching a phone that glowed against her face. She didn't wave or look up as I stopped. "Emma?" I asked, through the passenger window. She nodded, opened the rear door, and slid in without a word. She smelled faintly of lake water and something metallic, like rust. Her hoodie sleeves were damp. Her hair clung to her cheeks. "Rough night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't answer. Instead, she stared out the window, her reflection flickering with every passing streetlight. About 5 minutes in, my GPS froze, just stopped updating. Signal loss wasn't unusual that far out, so I kept driving straight, figuring it'd reconnect soon. But that's when she spoke, softly. "You missed the turn." Her voice startled me. It was sharp, but quiet, like she hadn't used it in hours. "There wasn't a turn," I said, checking the mirrors. She didn't reply. When I looked back through the rearview mirror, she was already watching me. Something about her eyes looked wrong, dull, almost gray under the interior light. The road narrowed, trees closing in on both sides. The GPS still wouldn't load, and the drizzle had thickened into rain that sounded like static on the roof. Then, without me touching anything, the voice on the navigation app spoke again, flat, robotic. "Turn left now." But there was no road, just a gap in the guardrail leading straight into forest. I slowed down, ready to turn back, but the woman leaned forward slightly. Her voice was low, almost pleading. "Please, just keep driving." Every instinct told me no, but there was something brittle in her tone, like fear more than malice. So I kept going another half mile until we reached an intersection with a single streetlight humming above it. That's when she said something I'll never forget. "You shouldn't have stopped when you did." "What?" I asked, glancing in the mirror. Her seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. The seatbelt still latched. I slammed on the brakes so hard the car fishtailed. Rain hammered the roof. I turned fully around, nothing but a damp indentation on the seat. My heart was pounding when I noticed movement in the side mirror. A figure, same hoodie, same small frame, was walking down the center of the road behind me, barefoot, leaving prints in the wet asphalt.
head down. I threw the car in drive and tore out of there. By the time I reached the freeway, my hands were shaking too hard to hold the wheels steady. I pulled into a gas station just outside the city and sat there with the engine idling, trying to process what happened. When I opened the app to report the ride, it showed trip canceled, no pickup, no fare, no record, no Emma K anywhere in my history. I told myself maybe it was a glitch, maybe I'd hallucinated half of it. But when I stepped out to pump gas, something caught my eye on the rear passenger window. 5 small prints, like fingertips drawn in condensation, inside the car. 2 nights later, I drove that same stretch again out of stubborn curiosity. I slowed where the guardrail was broken. The streetlight at the intersection was still there, flickering weakly in the mist. And beneath it, half buried in mud, was a phone, its cracked screen faintly glowing, even though there was no power icon. When I picked it up, the lock screen lit with a photo. A smiling young woman, hair tied back, hoodie up. Her name on the wallpaper read, Emma Klein, 1994-2018. I dropped it and left. I deleted the rideshare app that night and haven't driven for them since.
2 summers ago, I accepted an invitation I probably should have ignored. A college acquaintance named Dylan messaged me out of nowhere, saying he'd bought a plot of land near Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and built a small hunting cabin there. He wanted a weekend of reconnection, beer, and nature. I hadn't seen him in years. We weren't close, but I figured, why not? The pictures he sent looked incredible. Mountains, clear water, endless trees. I cleared my schedule and made the drive from Spokane one Friday afternoon. By the time my tires left the highway and hit gravel, the signal bars vanished. The sun was low, bleeding gold between the trees. An old hand-painted sign marked the entrance, Hawthorne Trail, private road. It was nearly dark when I reached a wooden gate tied shut with rope instead of a lock. Dylan's truck wasn't there, but his text from the morning said, "I'll meet you at the cabin. Just follow the trail." So I parked, grabbed my overnight bag, and started walking. The forest swallowed sound fast, just crunching gravel under my boots and the occasional crack of something small in the brush. After 15 minutes, I saw the roof line through the trees, a single-story cabin with smoke barely curling from its chimney. The front door was slightly open, lamplight spilling onto the porch. "Dylan?" I called out. No answer. Inside smelled of burnt coffee and old wood. 2 mugs sat on the counter, one half full, still warm. Boot prints crossed the floor toward the back door. I figured he'd gone to grab more firewood, so I unpacked, threw my bag on a bunk, and stepped out to help. The forest behind the cabin sloped steeply toward a creek. Down there, half hidden by brush, was an older-looking shack, smaller, weather-beaten, leaning to one side. I shouted again. Nothing. When I turned back toward the cabin, something flickered in the corner of my eye. Movement in the window. A man's face. Not Dylan's. Older, unshaven, pale. He was looking straight at me through the glass. By the time I climbed the porch steps, the window was empty. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, except the back door now hung wide open. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the tree line. The beam caught nothing but fog rising off the creek. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe Dylan had shown up without me hearing him. Still, I locked every latch before sitting by the fire with a cold beer that tasted like tin.
I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember was the unmistakable creak of the front steps. 2 slow steps, then silence. The fire had burned to embers. I whispered, "Dylan?" But my voice sounded too loud. A shadow slid across the crack under the door, blocking the faint moonlight for a second, then gone. I stood frozen until something brushed the window behind me. I spun around, handprints smudged in condensation. 5 of them, high on the glass, like someone tall had pressed both palms there to look in. That's when I heard breathing. Not outside, inside. A slow inhale from somewhere near the kitchen. I lifted the flashlight, sweeping across the counter, the table, the hallway, and stopped on a figure half hidden by the doorway. He wore an old green coat, soaked and dirty, face pale as bone. "Who are you?" I managed. He didn't speak. He just smiled. Thin lips, cracked teeth, and pointed toward the back door. Then he turned and walked through it into the trees. I grabbed my keys and ran for the truck, but when I hit the gate, it was closed again, this time knotted tight with new rope. I sat in the truck all night with the doors locked, staring at the cabin through the windshield. Nothing moved after that, not even the trees, just fog, shifting in slow patterns. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to check inside one last time. The place was silent, cold, but on the table lay something new I hadn't seen before. It showed the same cabin, maybe 30 years earlier. 3 men stood out front with hunting rifles. The one in the middle wore the same green coat. I flipped it over. Scrawled in pencil were the words, "Property of Dylan M., 1987. My stomach dropped. Dylan would have been 4 years old in 1987. I drove until I found service and called the number from his old message. A woman answered. When I asked for Dylan, she paused before saying quietly, "I'm sorry. He passed away last winter. Car accident." I never told her about the cabin, the man in the coat, or the photo. I just hung up, turned the truck around, and left Idaho behind. Sometimes I wonder if that property even exists on any current map, because every time I try to look it up online, Hawthorne Trail doesn't appear at all. Business trips had never bothered me until that summer in Arizona. I was driving from Phoenix to Albuquerque for a client meeting when a storm rolled in, lightning flashing across the desert, wind pushing dust over the windshield like waves of smoke. After 4 straight hours on the road, I started scanning for any motel sign I could find. That's when the Bluebird Motel appeared out of nowhere, flickering blue neon against a wall of darkness. The place looked like it hadn't seen guests in years. Cracked asphalt parking lot, vending machine glowing half alive, and the lobby door that jingled when I stepped in. Behind the counter sat an old man wearing a faded uniform shirt and thick glasses. He said, "Late one, huh?" I said, "Yeah, just need a room for the night." He slid over a key on a brass tag that read 27. He said, "End of the hall, upstairs. Don't mind the wind, it shakes the windows." I nodded, thanked him, and climbed the creaky stairs. The corridor smelled like old carpet and rain. Room 27 was at the far corner. The number was half peeled off, and the door stuck before opening. Inside, 1 double bed, mustard yellow curtains, humming air conditioning. It wasn't much, but it was dry. I tossed my bag down and collapsed onto the bed, still hearing the rain hammer the window. That's when I noticed something carved faintly into the headboard. 3 letters, scratched deep into the wood. S-A-M. The rain eased around midnight, leaving only wind. I must have been half asleep when I heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the bathroom vent. At first, it was rhythmic, like water dripping. Then it changed, became irregular, sharper, like someone whispering behind thin metal. I turned off the TV. The whispering stopped, but when I leaned closer, pressing an ear to the vent, I caught fragments of words. "Can't breathe, please." I stumbled back, heart pounding. Maybe it was a radio or the room next door. I picked up the phone to call the front desk, but the line was dead. No dial tone, just static. So I went downstairs. The lobby was empty. Only the neon glow from the sign outside lit the room. The old man was gone. On the counter sat an open guest ledger. Curious, I flipped through pages until I found room 27. The last check-in listed under it was dated June 1998, 27 years ago. The name written, Sam Keller. I froze. The air felt faintly of dust and mildew, the kind that sticks in your throat. When I looked up, a door behind the counter, marked maintenance, was slightly ajar. A cold draft slipped through, carrying that same whispering sound.
distant but unmistakable.
When I got back upstairs, the corridor felt colder. The fluorescent lights buzzed, flickering at the far end near room 29, the one beside mine. I noticed for the first time that the door to 29 was cracked open. Inside, the light was on, casting a long shadow across the hallway carpet. I knocked once, no answer. "Hello? Front desk?" Nothing. I pushed the door wider. The room was identical to mine, except for one thing. The furniture was covered in clear plastic, thick dust underneath. In the corner stood a single suitcase, brown leather, half rotted from age. The tag read S. Keller in faded ink. I unlatched it. Inside were old clothes, a wallet, and a Polaroid photo. The picture showed a man in front of the Bluebird Motel sign, smiling awkwardly beside a blue pickup. On the back, written in pen, "First night on the road. See you soon, M." A sudden gust slammed the door behind me. I turned, and the vent above the bed rattled violently. Then a man's voice shouted through it, hoarse and desperate. "Get out!" The lamp flickered. The television clicked on by itself, static filling the room. In the snow of pixels, for a second, a face appeared. His face, same as the photo. I bolted out of the door and back into the hallway, heart slamming in my chest. I didn't sleep. By dawn, the wind had stopped, and the desert outside glowed pale pink under the sunrise. I packed my things fast and hurried to the lobby, key in hand. The bell on the door jingled when I walked in, but the counter was empty again. On the wall hung a dusty frame with local newspaper clippings. One headline caught my eye: "Man missing after storm. Body never found." The date, June 1998. The photo, the same man from the Polaroid, Sam Keller. Below the article, someone had scrawled in pen, barely legible, "Room 27, still his." I dropped the key on the counter and turned to leave. But as I stepped outside, the neon sign flickered back to life for a split second, bright blue wings flashing, and I heard it again, carried faintly on the morning wind. "Please, breathe." I looked back one last time. The second-floor window of room 27 reflected the sunrise, and for just a moment, a figure stood there, half in shadow, watching me go. I got in the car, started the engine, and drove until the sign disappeared completely in the rearview mirror. A week later, out of curiosity, I searched Bluebird Motel, Arizona. Nothing. No listings. No address. But in one old travel forum post from 2002, someone mentioned a motel by that name outside Winslow. They said it burned down after a lightning strike in 1999.